Released in 2014, The Fall had a mixed reception, partly due to it releasing just after a title that looked incredibly similar. Developer John Warner always planned a trilogy. He raised the funds for the original game via a Kickstarter campaign. Inspired by Metroid, Limbo and games such as Monkey Island, while it was received well for the most part, it had steep competition and some of the systems were a little awkward to say the least. Combat was mediocre, with terrible controls for aiming and shooting. Fans of the original though might be pleasantly surprised here. Stick with me as we delve into the dark world of The Fall, from crazy butler robots to randy droids in wigs. Flash forward 4 years and The Fall 2 is finally here. Do anything, use anyone, become Unbound, as the bold heading for Over the Moon's new adventure story game goes, thrusting you into an all too familiar experience that mirrors the first game initially, but then takes an entirely new turn. Fighting for your very existence, the story begins with an unknown user attempting to terminate our AI heroine Arid. Backing herself up before her famous suit is destroyed, you search the virtual world and systems to track down your would-be assailant. The user, as he is known, is initially tracked to a stately house in which you take control of a butler droid. Delightfully, he is fully aware of Arid taking control of his systems, and the dialogue between the two, which is wonderfully voice acted, is exceptional.
You are the last body I must exit.
Trifles, trifles. The only matter of importance is the Mistress Beauty routine. Hop, hop.
I was pleasantly surprised to find myself laughing out loud at an early stage in such a tense and mysterious game. There are some adult themes here, however, including one robot, shall we say, devoted to providing love? As Arid, who struggles to maintain her own set of distinct rules or code, you work to track down her attacker, and thankfully this time are given much more variety when it comes to how the story unfolds. Playing as up to 4 different hosts, Arid will experience choices and consequences not previously seen in the series. Fans of the original game will also be delighted to hear that the story is considerably longer this time around, clocking in at about 4 times the length of the first game and including much more voice acting and excellent dialogue. You will feel as though your actions have a consequence.
What? What are these shadows? Do not listen to her, Master.
He is clearly dead.
Are we dead?
No, sir.
Did you let us die?
Sir, no.
While not feeling totally free, as the story follows a linear path, but one filled with so many twists and turns, it feels deceptively open-ended. Further into the story, there are some real surprises, and you may genuinely have to reflect upon your own moral code, which was fantastic. As the second game of a planned trilogy, expect to have a few quests go partially unanswered, but overall, much like the first title, the game has a hugely satisfying conclusion, one best experienced on Nintendo Switch alone, like a science fiction novel.
Please remove me from your body as well.
There is no time.
I loved every minute of the story. Gameplay is best described as a mixture of a few other titles, and thankfully is also much more refined than its predecessor. For the most part, you'll be solving logical puzzles, of which there are far more this time around, using your trusty torch to shine on objects you wish to look at, and then choose to interact with directly or through a carried item. I like this system as you didn't have to click any buttons to look at items, you just shine your light on them. It is in these sections of the game that developer John Warner's inspirations become clear. Thankfully, the combat is an area which is vastly improved over the original. While it's still not perfect, your ability to jump and lock onto enemies adds a much needed level of control over the game. Locking onto enemies quickly becomes second nature, and jumping to dodge incoming fire and counter with a shot feels satisfying, if a little on the clunky side. There is an easy mode, but to be honest, the combat would get quite dull if it was any easier. It's pitched perfectly here if you ask me. There are hand-to-hand sections as well which are very cool and make you feel hugely overpowered. These were a nice contrast to the shooting-only sections. Don't be fooled by the look of the game, there are some brutal puzzles in here as well. As comes with the territory, expect to be scratching your head at times. I had to leave the game alone for a few hours before having a eureka moment, returning with a solution in mind. It's moments like these that I used to love about those classic adventure games of old. Going to school and asking friends how far they'd gotten with Dare the Tentacle and hearing they were further along than me, only to finally realise you had to conduct lightning, was the stuff of dreams as a child.
This cannot be right.
Controls. Over the Moon have been hard at work on improving on every aspect of the first game. This is no more obvious than when you first take control of the main character, or should I say characters, as this time around you will control a slew of different robots, from butlers to, as I mentioned, pleasure robots. Early in the game I found aiming the torch to look at items a little slow, but you soon get used to how quickly you can line it up as you walk about the environments. Whereas before, the aiming of the weapon was a hideous experience where walking forward would recenter the gun, causing an awkward walking, aiming, stopping, aiming, missing cycle that put some players completely off the game. This time around, the controls are much more sensible, employing a button to automatically lock you onto an enemy, which can be toggled to cycle through all the enemies on the screen. You can still manually aim the gun, but having the quick lock-on button makes for a much more satisfying combat experience. Some of the controls remain unchanged. Pressing one button allows you to bring up your torch, which can then be pointed at items, allowing you to choose from a drop-down menu if you wish, where you can interact or use an object. Overall, the controls are quick and responsive and rarely feel frustrating. The HD rumble here is average at best. It clearly wasn't a focus of the developer in the same way as we saw in Celeste, where it became a fundamental part of the gameplay. Here it's simply just functional. Graphics and sound.
From the debris could undo us.
These bodies are mine.
Variety was not a word you could really use about the original The Fall, but it's clear that the developers wanted to change that with The Fall 2. The colour palette is far wider, and while the environments are still dark, the glowing reds, greens and blues of the now 4 times larger universe make for some stellar backdrops. Much like Blade Runner or new Netflix series Altered Carbon, the world has an otherness about it, which is both intriguing and frightening in equal measure. This is most certainly extended to the sound, which swings from dark and mysterious to techno thumps of adrenaline. The Nintendo Switch has some really great games with excellent quality soundtracks, and this is no exception. While you're unlikely to be tapping along to these tunes, they do an excellent job of conveying a dystopian future. Also of note was how the game doesn't shy away from allowing silence at times. This is an oft-forgotten area, where the sound of your AI's metallic feet on the cold hard floor becomes music in and of itself. It wasn't all perfect. There are definitely a few generic sci-fi tracks in there, that will be forgotten, but The Fall 2 knows how to sync atmospheric music and visuals wonderfully. This is primarily a story-driven game and as such has no multiplayer. Quite frankly, I'm glad about that, as games are far too often tacking these elements on in a bid to sell loot crates. EA. What we do have here is a far more fleshed out experience. The campaign runs around 10 to 12 hours long, which is about 3 times the length of the original game. Having multiple dialogue options is certainly nice, and there may be a potential for a second playthrough. What is more likely though is that you will complete this one and then come back to it every few years, much like you would with your favourite novel.
Much better, sir. Much better.
We rate this game 82% overall. Sometimes that wait pays off, and for the many fans of The Fall, you will not be disappointed. My poor wife has to watch me staring grin on face at this one for over a week now. I haven't told her yet, but I'm going for a second playthrough. Well done to the developers. You set out to improve upon every aspect of the initial concept, and you have. The ability to possess various other robots is inspired, and the dark humor is perfect. The music is a joy to listen to, and the sound effects are spot on. If you haven't done so already, check out our recent review of The Dark Side Detective or Celeste, which are two great games on the Nintendo Switch. Cheers guys, keep it Switch up, and I'll see you all on the next one.
I will claim a new host.
Oh, welcome back.
You will assist me.